The UK does not use an end-to-end auditable voting system. That is to say, there is no way for you to check that your vote was counted the way that it was cast. Basically, you go to the polling station, cast your vote, put it in the ballot box, and then you go home, wait for the results on the news, and just assume that everything was done above board and that your vote wasn't stolen or corrupted in any way. Unfortunately, history has shown us that this assumption is rarely guaranteed. So to put your mind at ease, let us analyse the British voting system, its strengths and its weaknesses. When you go to a polling station in the UK, you will be greeted by two officials sitting at a table with ballot papers and ballot boxes. This is the first point at which the system could fail. You are not required to provide a photo ID in order to vote. Therefore, if you knew the name of someone who is registered to vote in that area and you knew that they were not going to vote that day, you could simply claim to be them. This is known as voter impersonation. However, it is limited, as you would have to go to different polling stations each time you did it, or the polling officials would recognize you as someone who had already voted that day. Due to the limited scope of this type of fraud and the proportion of the population that do not have picture ID, imposing a requirement for a picture ID would actually result in the system being more undemocratic, as it would amount to demographic manipulation of the electorate. You could also misuse proxy votes. The system in the UK allows you to cast a vote for someone else, provided that you have that person's permission to do so. In the past, this has resulted in what is known as granny farming, whereby an apparently well-meaning individual goes into residential homes and offers to proxy vote for all those who cannot make it to the polling station on election day. They diligently write down the names of each resident and how they want to vote, but when they get to the polling station, they just use all the extra votes to vote for their own preferred candidate. To prevent granny farming and other proxy-based vote fraud systems, it is now illegal to proxy vote for more than two people to whom you are not directly related. When you go to a polling station in the UK, you give your name to the first official, who ticks off your name from that area's register of electors and gives the other person the elector number. The second official has another register with all of the ballot paper numbers on it. This is called the corresponding numbers list. She then writes the elector number on her list beside the next available ballot paper number. She then gives you the ballot paper that has that number on it. With me so far? The reason they do this is to ensure that those who are not on the electoral register are not able to vote, and that no one can vote more than once, while at the same time ensuring that your ballot paper cannot be directly traced to your name, thereby preventing corruption through intimidation and vote buying. You then go into the voting booth, cast your vote, fold your ballot paper to keep it secret, and put it in the ballot box. At the end of the day, when the polls have been closed, the boxes are taken to a central location, usually a church hall or community centre, to be counted. This is the second point at which the integrity of the system is vulnerable. It is possible that the individuals at the polling station could simply wait until the end of the day and then, when no one is around, assign the registered numbers of all the voters on the list who did not turn out to vote against the remaining unused ballot numbers. This would effectively give the poll station staff a huge number of blank ballot papers, which they could then fill in any way they choose. This is known as ballot box stuffing. The only safeguard against this is the fact that you can use a Freedom of Information request to gain a copy of the corresponding numbers list. If you did not vote, and yet your voter registration number was assigned to a ballot, then you have a case to prove electoral fraud. Unfortunately, it is unlikely that such a fraud will ever be discovered, for the simple reason that if you didn't care enough about the outcome of the election to turn out to vote, then you probably didn't care enough about the outcome of the election to corroborate the integrity of the voting process. That said, if you do know someone who isn't going to vote in the election, ask them to keep their polling card so you can make a Freedom of Information request and check that their vote wasn't stolen. Once all the ballot boxes have arrived at the central location, the first stage of counting can begin. They take the ballot papers and separate them into piles of 100. This is done by counters working in pairs. Each person counts 25, then swaps with the person next to them and counts their pile to make sure that both parties have counted 25. There are usually 4 counters to each table, so each table counts 100 votes at a time. Once everyone at the table agrees that there are 100 votes in the pile, they put an elastic band around the pile, put it to one side, and then count the next 100 ballots. It would be possible for anybody involved in this process to spoil ballot papers that showed votes that they disliked. All they would have to do is put a cross in another box on the ballot paper, thereby nullifying the vote. This is known as overvoting a ballot paper. However, there are usually election observers present at these events to ensure that this does not happen. Once they have counted the total number of ballot papers, They get the list from each polling station and count up the total number of people who came through the doors of the polling station of each particular ward. Then, when they are satisfied that the numbers tally up, all the ballots from all the wards are put into what is called mixing bins, those grey boxes on the floor. The mixing bins then contain all the votes for that particular ward. The mixing bins are then padlocked, ready for the count the next day. This is the second point at which the system is vulnerable, as anyone with a key could simply add extra ballots to the boxes overnight. To prevent this, the local authority keeps all unused ballot papers in those big brown paper bags that you see. At the end of the night, all those bags are sealed and stored elsewhere. Every ballot paper has a barcode on it. That way, if anybody wishes to mount a challenge, they can account for every single ballot paper that was used in the election. They can count all the unused ballot papers, then recount all the used ballot papers, then compare the number to the total number of ballot papers that were issued. If there is a discrepancy, then there is a case for electoral fraud. The only way that a fraud could occur in this instance is if you put X number of false ballots with forged barcodes into a locked box, and then took the same number of unused ballot papers from the corresponding sealed brown bag, making sure that the barcodes matched the false ballots that you put in. You would then have to doctor the numbers on the admin sheets so that the discrepancy does not show up during the next stage of the vote counting. It would need to be a pretty sophisticated inside job to corrupt the system at this stage. While it would also be possible for someone with a key to just open the box and spoil votes that he or she disliked, a higher number of spoiled ballot papers than is usual tend to raise suspicion. The next day they do the count. First, they separate the pile of votes into separate piles depending on how the person voted. In a normal election, there would be one pile for Labour, one pile for Conservative, one pile for the Liberal Party, and so on. However, in this referendum, the pile will be Leave and Remain, with one pile for spoiled ballots. Once all the ballots are separated into separate piles, they can then count the number of ballots in each pile. If these numbers do not add up to the total number recorded as having been counted the night before, they recount them until they do match. If they never match, they go back to yesterday's list and tally it again until the number of votes counted equals the number of votes cast. This is the final stage at which the system could be abused. When the votes are being counted, all the counters are doing is counting the ballot papers. They are not rechecking that the ballot papers that they are counting are all marked in the same way. So if the people responsible for separating the ballots into piles deliberately place ballots in the wrong pile, they would be simultaneously increasing the number of votes for one side while decreasing the number of votes for the other side. Indeed, this is one of the accusations of electoral fraud from the recent Scottish referendum. Vote rigging over Scottish independence is one of the biggest open secrets in British politics. Any Englishman who has ever spent any time in Scotland knows that the entire Scottish national identity is based on their visceral hatred for the English, in the same way that England's entire national identity is based on a visceral hatred for the French. The idea that Scotland would ever vote to be ruled by Westminster is lunacy, and yet we are expected to believe that it happened. Unfortunately for the people involved in rigging the Scottish election, they seem to have been caught in the act by an eagle-eyed cameraman. I am now going to show you the footage that shows what appears to be electoral fraud taking place in the Scottish referendum.
This is Dabu7 with amazing proof that the Scottish referendum was rigged. You were looking at a woman right in front of you that takes and puts everything out of yes into the no and lays one down in yes and continues to keep stacking onto the no. This is proof in court, if you need it, video proof that the voting and the counting of the voting was rigged. Bombshell. Irrefutable. And if that's not enough, we'll take here a zoom in on this area, on the table, these stacks that are checked. You see this? This is from above. That is a yes box checked. A yes box. And it is a stack of probably all yeses in the no bin. They are busted. This is huge. I will leave multiple links in the description box as always. But the video proof alone is damning, and it's good enough to take and hammer it away in court. This has been Dabu7. And this is the truth.
And yet, despite this damning evidence, the Scottish authorities have point-blank refused to order a recount. Now, I have talked to people on both sides of the referendum, and both camps are concerned that the powers that be are going to rig the vote in favour of the other side. Indeed, some people believe this so strongly that they have decided not to vote so as not to add legitimacy to the result.
What he needs is a new courthouse. Now I propose it should be a modest, economical structure. Excuse me one moment.
Monk's already won by 3,000 more votes than there are voters.
Only 3, make it 20, 30. We don't need a victory, we need a Roman triumph.
But we don't have any more ballots.
Remember the first rule of politics. The ballots don't make the results. The counters make the results. The counters keep counting.
So regardless of which side you intend to vote for, if you care about the result and you are free the day after the referendum, or if you know someone who is, give them a camera and send them down to the counting hall. See how many rats you can catch in the act. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed this message, share it.